The rain had been falling for hours, cold, relentless. The streets shimmered under the dim glow of the streetlights. Every drop that hit the pavement sounded like time itself ticking away. Ethan stood at the corner of the old cafe, soaked to the bone. His clothes clung to him, heavy with rain and failure. He stared at the piece of paper in his trembling hands. The rejection letter. Another one. The seventh in a row. For years he had dreamed of becoming a writer. He had poured his heart into every page. He had written late into the night, long after the city had gone silent. But all he received in return were rejections that said, "Not what we are looking for." He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Inside, his chest felt tight. There was a storm raging there too, one that no one could see. He could turn back now. He could give in to the voice in his head whispering, "You have tried enough." But something in him resisted. Something inside refused to break. Ethan lifted his gaze toward the cafe window. Inside, people laughed, shared stories, and sipped warm coffee. A world of comfort just beyond the glass. Yet he stood outside, cold, uncertain, but alive with determination. He remembered his father's words from years ago. "Your son, the world will test your spirit. It will push you until you feel empty." But it is in those moments that your character is revealed. You either yield or you rise. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadow. The rain had not stopped, but neither had he. He walked, one step at a time, toward the small apartment that had become his sanctuary and his battlefield. Inside, the air was still. The walls were bare, except for a single photograph. His mother's smile. She had always believed in him. Her voice echoed in his heart, calm and strong. "Do not give up, Ethan. Dreams take time. Greatness demands patience." He sat down at his desk, water dripping from his sleeves onto the wood. The lamp flickered, throwing soft light across the notebook. Blank pages stared back at him, daring him to begin again. For a long moment he hesitated. His hands trembled above the keyboard. But then something shifted inside him, a quiet certainty, a whisper that said, "A start." And so he did. Word by word, sentence by sentence, he wrote, not because success was guaranteed, but because giving up was not an option. The hours passed. The rain softened outside, like the world was holding its breath. Ethan lost himself in his work, his pain transforming into purpose. His failures began to feel like stepping stones, not barriers. He realized something powerful that night. The world does not reward the fastest. It rewards the unrelenting, those who keep showing up no matter the storm. When morning came, the first light crept through the window. Ethan leaned back, exhausted but fulfilled. He read the words he had written, raw, imperfect, but real. For the first time in months, he smiled. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more rejections, more sleepless nights, more battles with doubt. But he knew now that every great dream demands endurance. Every dreamer must learn to stand when everything inside screams to sit down. Ethan rose, stretched his tired arms, and looked out at the dawn. The rain had stopped, but the street still glistened. It was a new day, and he had survived the night. He whispered to himself, "I will not stop. I will not bow. I am unrelenting." The sound of his own voice filled the room. Steady, powerful, alive. He sat again and turned the page. His journey had not ended. It had just begun. And somewhere deep in his soul, he knew one day the world would read his words, not because he was the most talented, but because he refused to give up when it mattered most. The light of morning grew brighter. The city stirred awake, and Ethan kept writing, driven by something far greater than fear, driven by purpose, driven by the fire of the unrelenting. He kept writing until the sun climbed high above the rooftops. The golden light poured through his window, warm against his face, a quiet promise that every dark night eventually finds its dawn. His fingers were tired, but his spirit was alive. Each word he typed was a declaration of defiance against the voice of doubt that had once held him hostage. That voice, the one that said, "You are wasting your time." The one that whispered, "You will never make it." The one that laughed every time a door closed. It was still there, but quieter now, weaker. Because Ethan had learned that you cannot silence fear by running from it. You silence fear by facing it every single day until it loses its power. He remembered when he first started. He was 21, filled with big dreams and naive hope. He believed success would come quickly if he worked hard enough. He thought talent alone would open doors. But talent without perseverance, he learned, is like a fire without air. It burns out before it shines. He thought about the nights when he wrote under a flickering bulb, hungry but hopeful. The times when his bank account was empty, but his heart was full of stubborn belief. And the moments when he wanted to quit, but something inside him whispered, not yet. Ethan realized that all along, struggle had not been a punishment. It had been preparation. Life was shaping him, carving away the weakness, building a foundation strong enough to carry the weight of his dream. Every failure was a lesson disguised as pain. Every rejection was proof that he was still in the fight. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the rhythm of his own breath. It was steady, unbroken, the rhythm of persistence. He thought about people who give up right before their breakthrough. People who stop climbing just before reaching the summit. He understood now. The difference between success and surrender is often just one more try. Later that day, he printed out his new story and walked to the same post office that had once delivered his rejection letter. The clerk recognized him and smiled sympathetically. "Another submission?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes," he said with quiet confidence. "But this time it feels different." As he left the post office, he did not look back. He did not wait for approval or validation. He had already won something greater. He had mastered himself. Weeks passed. Every morning he wrote. Every evening he read. He refined his craft, not because someone was watching, but because he believed in growth. He knew that greatness is not born overnight. It is built brick by brick, habit by habit, day by day. Sometimes he thought of giving up, yes. But then he remembered his mother's voice, his father's wisdom, and the countless people who had stopped trying too soon. He promised himself he would not join them. He would be the exception. He would be the proof that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to quit. One night, months later, Ethan returned home to find a letter in his mailbox. It looked like all the others. Plain, white, familiar. He held it for a long time before opening it. Part of him expected another rejection, another a thank you. But no, this time the words were different. "We are pleased to inform you that your story has been accepted for publication." For a moment, Ethan could not breathe. The room seemed to blur around him. He read the sentence again and again, afraid it might disappear. Tears welled up in his eyes, not because he had finally succeeded, but because he had finally proven that persistence works. He thought of every long night, every painful no, every moment of doubt, and he smiled because all of it had led him here. He whispered softly to himself, it was worth it. But even as joy filled his heart, another realization followed. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The letter was not a trophy, it was a torch, a reminder that success is not a destination. It is a journey of endless becoming. Ethan walked to his desk, sat down, and opened a new page. He began to write again, not because he needed another acceptance letter, but because he had found his purpose. He had discovered the meaning of being unrelenting. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Cars passed, people hurried, the world moved on. Unaware of the quiet victory that had just unfolded in a small apartment on the corner of 8th Street, Ethan looked out the window and smiled. He was no longer just chasing a dream, he was living one. He understood now that dreams are not owned by the lucky. They belong to those who endure, to those who rise after every fall, to those who stand tall when the world expects them to bow. Ethan whispered again, his voice steady, his heart shook. And no matter what comes next, I will keep going, because I am unrelenting. And as the night deepened, his words became a promise to every dreamer who has ever been told they are not enough. A promise to those who are tired but still fighting. A promise to the world that true strength is not measured by speed, but by endurance. Because the unrelenting never stop. They bend, but they never break. They fail, but they never fall forever. They hurt, but they never quit. And in the quiet of that small room, a single truth echoed. The world belongs not to the talented, not to the gifted, but to the unrelenting. And that night, Ethan wrote those very words, not just for himself, but for anyone who would one day need to hear them. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. The city was still asleep, the streets painted in gray and gold. The smell of damp earth filled the air after a night of rain. He stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching droplets slide down the glass like tiny rivers. He felt something inside him shift. Not pride, not relief, but peace. For the first time, he was not chasing the approval of others. He was chasing excellence. He realized that being unrelenting was not about being perfect. It was about being consistent, even when no one noticed. His phone buzzed with messages from people congratulating him on his published story. Friends who had doubted him suddenly admired his dedication. Relatives who once told him to be practical now shared his success online. He smiled gently because he knew that the applause did not define him. It was the silence that had built him. It was the nights when no one clapped that shaped his character. He went for a walk through the park near his apartment. The sun had risen now, golden rays cutting through the mist. Children were laughing by the swings, a man was jogging with his dog, and an old woman sat on a bench feeding the pigeons. Ethan breathed deeply, letting the fresh morning air fill his lungs. He thought about how long it had taken to reach this simple peace, the kind that only comes after chaos. He remembered every time he had almost given up, the rejections that had felt like wounds, the friends who had told him, maybe it is time to do something else. The days when hope seemed so thin it could barely stand, but every single time something within him whispered, not yet. He understood now what that whisper really was. It was faith, not blind faith, but the kind born from action, from showing up when it hurt, from trying when tired, from believing when everything else said no. He thought of how many people stopped right before the miracle happened. How many dreams die not because they are impossible, but because people quit too soon. He had been inches from quitting many times, but he had kept going. He had been unrelenting. Later that week, he was invited to speak at a local university, the same one that had once rejected his scholarship application years ago. Standing backstage, he could hear the murmur of hundreds of students waiting. He was nervous. His palms were sweating, his heartbeat steady but strong. He smiled because this moment felt poetic. Life had brought him full circle. When he walked on stage, the applause was thunderous. He waited for it to settle, then began to speak. I was not always like this, he said. I was afraid, I was uncertain. I failed more times than I can count. The audience was silent. He continued. But one day, I made a promise to myself I would never quit, no matter what it cost me. And that promise changed everything. He looked around the hall, his eyes meeting the faces of young dreamers, some hopeful, some broken, all searching. Well, do you know what I learned? He asked. That talent may open the first door, but perseverance keeps it open. That you can be ordinary and still achieve the extraordinary if you refuse to stop. As he spoke, he saw heads nodding, eyes glistening. He saw himself in them, the younger version of himself, scared but hopeful, ready to take one more chance. After the event, a student approached him. She held a notebook close to her chest and said softly, I was going to quit writing, but now I think I will keep going. Ethan smiled, his voice gentle. Then you have already won, he said. That night, as he walked home beneath a sky full of stars, Ethan thought about the strange beauty of life. The way it tests you until you almost break. The way it takes everything from you just to see if you will still stand. And when you do, it rewards you, not with things, but with strength, clarity, and purpose. He realized that being unrelenting was not about fighting endlessly. Ethan stood before the mirror one last time that night. His reflection looked the same, tired eyes, ink-stained hands, and the quiet calm of someone who had walked through storms and survived. But something within him had changed forever. He no longer saw the man who doubted himself. He saw the man who refused to quit, the man who stumbled but kept moving, the man who chose courage when comfort was easier. He whispered to his reflection, "This is who I was meant to become." He stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against his skin. The world around him was silent, yet alive. The hum of the city, the distant sound of a train, the soft rustle of leaves under a streetlight. He walked slowly, not with haste, but with purpose, because he understood something powerful: the journey never truly ends. Every goal reached simply opens another road. Every victory whispers, "And now what will you do next?" And every challenge faced leaves behind a trail for others to follow. He looked up at the stars, those same stars that had watched him struggle, fail, rise, and rise again. For years, they had been silent witnesses to his story. And now, as they shimmered above, they seemed to glow brighter, as if proud of what he had become. He smiled and said softly, "I did not give up. I became unrelenting." At that moment, he realized the truth that every dreamer must one day learn. The real reward is not the applause. It is not the success. It is the strength you gain in the fight, the faith you find in the darkness, and the fire that never goes out once it has been lit. He walked back home, heart full, step steady, eyes forward. And as the door closed behind him, the world felt a little lighter, because somewhere in one man's relentless pursuit of purpose, a spark had been born that would ignite countless others. He sat down at his desk one last time, opened his journal, and wrote a single line across the page: "Unrelenting, because the world belongs to those who never stop." And as his pen lifted from the paper, Ethan smiled. The journey that began in uncertainty had ended in truth. And that truth would live on, not just in words, but in every heart that chooses to keep going when it hurts, keep believing when it is hard, and keep fighting when everyone else has stopped. That is what it means to be unrelenting.